MeLe's Overclock 4C is not what you'd expect from a mini PC based on the name. It's got nothing to do with overclocking, and compared to MeLe's Quieter 4C, most things are the opposite of what you'd expect. What do I mean by that? Well, the Quieter is fanless, yet it's smaller than the Overclock, which is actively cooled, and the Quieter has Intel's N100 CPU inside, while the Overclock has the N95. If I was looking at these minis side by side and had to take a guess which one was which, I'd guess they were the other way around. But the good news is, I'm going to compare them both. So, how does the MeLe Overclock 4C stack up against its more powerful silent brother? Pretty well actually, and I'll show you why right after this message. The EaseUS RecExperts screen recorder is an all-in-one solution for recording everything on your screen, whether it's online meetings, gameplay, tutorials, and more. RecExperts supports 4K and 60 FPS in various video formats, and there are plenty of additional features, including a simple video editor to clean up your recording. Give it a test run with a link in the video description. So, we've established MeLe's Overclock 4C is bigger than the Quieter, has a slightly cut down CPU, and is cooled by a fan. Both minis are also made from plastic with metal bottom plates, and have a similar look to them, apart from the top lid and rounded edges on the overclock. Overall though, both minis look great and will look nice on any desk. Price wise, the overclock is $20 cheaper for the same configuration. That's 16GB of DDR4 and 5 12GB storage for $200 US. MeLe has also provided me with an additional coupon for my views, which you can find in the video description, and brings the price down further. Included in the box is a starter guide, monitor mount, region adapter, USB-C power supply, and screws. Another similarity between the two MeLe units is the port selection. On the side, USB 3 and USB 2. I couldn't find the details on the USB 3, but the first one should be 5 gigabit and the second one is either 5 or 10 gigabit if it's the same as the Quieter 4C. The third one is a USB 2 port. On the back, the Type-C 10 gigabit port supports power delivery and display. There's also an audio jack, microSD card reader, dual HDMI 2.0, reset button, and another USB-C for the power supply only. Finally, there's a Realtek gigabit LAN port for networking, along with a Realtek 8852BE chip inside, which gets you Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth connectivity. The two HDMI and USB-C allow up to 3 4K displays. Okay, moving on. Windows 11 Pro is included and has been modified, which is common, but my scan results for malware came up clean. For some reason, File Explorer is missing from the Windows taskbar. To access it, press the Windows and E key at the same time. Then, right-click the icon in the taskbar and pin it. Problem solved. I don't recall any Alder Lake N minis so far that haven't worked fine with Ubuntu off a USB drive, and the overclock is no different. It's all good. Both MeLe minis are easy to open. Just 4 screws and then remove the bottom plate. The 256GB NVMe drive has a thermal pad which connects to the metal plate for cooling. The other 256GB storage comes from soldered on eMMC, which MeLe has been using on every device, and well, if you've seen my previous reviews, you know I'm not a fan of it. That's also where the Windows OS is installed on. The Wi-Fi chip is soldered on, CMOS battery is easily accessible, and unlike the Quieter 4C, there's a RAM slot instead of soldered on memory, which features a 16GB stick of DDR4 at 3200. Intel's Alder Lake N only supports single channel memory configurations and officially up to 16GB, but 32GB has worked fine every time I tried it. Intel's N100 is faster than the N95 in both CPU and GPU performance if cooling is up to snuff and the power limit is maxed out, but the overclock has a fan, which helps it get ahead of the Quieter in single core by 15%. The margin tightens with the increased power limit for the Quieter, but it runs very hot and is not recommended. The overclock is only around 1% slower than the fastest N95, so no meaningful difference in performance. In multi-core, MeLe's overclock is far ahead of the Quieter, a ginormous 58%, and that's still 7% ahead with a power limit raised. It's about 2% below the highest N95 score. You can also see a huge difference in video encoding, as the Quieter takes close to double the amount of time to render the same video. Interestingly, my Overclock nabbed first spot in video encoding compared to the other N95s. Moving on to the graphics benchmark. The Quieter is ahead by almost 6% in DX11 and 3% in DX12. So the Overclock performs like an N95 should. It trounces the Quieter and multi-core workloads at default power levels and is a bit worse in graphics according to these results, but we'll confirm with some game tests. It's cool to see a full speed M.2 Gen 3 NVMe drive slot, as most run at X2 speeds on these budget CPUs, but you can see the eMMC storage is pretty slow in comparison. While Windows runs fine on it and is pretty responsive, I would have preferred the soldered storage to be SATA instead. And also the Windows OS on the NVMe drive would be good too. Alrighty then, for the game comparisons, I've put the Quieter at its default and increased power mode against the Overclock. First up is the CPU heavy game Valorant. Unsurprisingly, it favors the CPU with a better multi-core result, so that's a win for the Overclock.
One enemy remaining.
I have the spike.
League of Legends is a game with opposite needs. It's heavy on the GPU, and since the Quieter had the better score in 3D Mark, it's not surprising it's slightly ahead of the 4C when the CPU isn't holding it back. GTA 5 is a similar result. This time 3D Mark is pretty darn accurate.
Who's snitch? Come on, let's get to the chopper. We move quick, we can beat the train.
And PS2 emulation performs very similarly between the two. So no surprises, the synthetic benchmarks are accurate when tested with games. The BIOS has plenty of options, but what most will be interested in can be found in the Advanced tab, and then customer exclusive functions. Auto power on, wake on LAN, and RTC wake is located here. One thing I haven't spoken much about is the cooling. MeLe's Overclock 4C has a copper heat pipe which transfers heat onto the heatsink and fan. It works really well. I recorded a max of just 75C. Something that did surprise me is how quiet the Overclock is, even under load. Again, the cooling solution works really well. Idle power draw of 10 watts is around average. The maximum is a bit better than average at 29 watts. Neither the eMMC or NVMe storage included with the Overclock 4C has a working temperature sensor, but the NVMe drive is at least cooled, so it should be okay. Alright, so MeLe's Overclock 4C is a unique mini PC. Its nice design looks perfectly fine on any disk. Performance is good. Even though it's got an N95, it holds up just fine against the Quieter 4C. Cooling is also impressive, and fan noise is very low. I'm really impressed how quiet it is. There's no 2.5 gigabit networking, the OS is on the eMMC drive, and it's no longer pocketable like the Quieter, unless you're wearing MC Hammer pants or something. So there we have it. The Overclock is a very similar device to the Quieter 4C, but cooled with a fan and quite a bit bigger. I'm curious, which one would you guys prefer? And if you'd like more detail on MeLe's Quieter 4C, I've linked the review for you right here. Cheers!